Let's go to our model, select our order and Command N to create a new file. And this is going to be a Swift file. I'm going to call this fuser, which is for Firebase user. Once we have the file ready, we can start creating our class. So first I'm going to import Firebase Authentication, because we are going to use the functions to authenticate our user with Firebase. And then let's create a class, call it fuser, and our user is going to have some parameters, so let ID, and this is going to be a string. Then we have var email, which is going to be string as well, and var first name, this is going to be string as well, and we have var last name, which is string, and we will have a variable called full name, which is string as well, and then we have var phone number, and this is string, and finally we have variable full address, and this is string as well, and it's one is an optional. And finally we need to keep a track of onboarding, so we say onboarding, this is going to be a boolean. So the reason we have the ID as constant here instead of a variable is once we set our ID, we are not going to change it, but the rest we should be able to edit it for our user in case he wants to change the email, first name, last name, phone number, or address. So we are having it as a variable. And once we have our fuser, we need some initializers. So let's create an initializer. This is going to be with ID, which is a string, and then with email, which is a string as well. Then we have our first name as a string, last name as string, and a phone number, and this is going to be string as well. So here we will need to set all these variables in our initializer. So say that my ID is equals, and we say underscore ID is the one we actually provide. So we set value of this is equals the one here, and we say email is equals to underscore email, first name is equals to underscore first name, last name equals underscore last name. Then we have our full name is equals, and here we can say first name plus, and we put a space here, then say plus last name. So we have first name, some space, and the last name. And then we have our phone number is equals to underscore phone number, and our onboarding is by default equals to false. Address is an optional, so we don't have to declare here if we don't want to. So by default we are putting an onboarding false because we are going to change the value here only when our user provides us all this information. Then let's create some functions to help us get our user information. So I'm going to say class func, and I'm doing this as a class func because we want to get this information without initializing our fuser class. So that's why we are putting a class in front of it. And this is going to be our current ID, and this is going to return a string. And here I want to return, and we say we access auth, and then we initialize authentication from our Firebase. And then I want to access the current user that is logged into the application, and then get a UID from my user. So this will return the user ID of my current logged in user. And then let's create another class func, and this is going to return the current user object itself. So we'll say current user, and this is going to return an F user, but this is going to be an optional because there may be a case when we don't have a current user saved locally, so it may be nil. So here what we're going to check if we have a current user. So say if authentication dot, and we call our authentication, access the current user. As you can see, it's an optional here. It has a question mark next to it. And if we are checking if this is not equals to nil, it means we have some kind of user saved. Otherwise, I'm going to just say return nil. So if this is not true, we are going to proceed and return nil as our F user. It means we have no local user. Then I'm going to, once we have a current user, as a safety, I want to also check, because what we are going to do is once we have a current user, we are going to also save it in our user defaults. So first we check if we have a current user with our Firebase, and if we do, we are going to check if we also have it in our user defaults. So I say if let dictionary is equals, and here I'm going to access my user defaults, and I want to get an object for key, and the key we are going to save our current user in our user defaults is going to be k current user. We have this in our constants, so if I jump here you will see this key, and this function will make more sense once we save the user to local user defaults. And in case if we have user saved in our user defaults, I'm going to say return, and here we are going to return our F user object. But first we will need to instantiate an F user object, and our F user object is going to be initialized not with this initializer, but we are going to write another initializer, because what we are saving in our user defaults is a dictionary, so it's key value pairs. So I'm going to create another initializer which will take a dictionary, key value pairs, and create an F user object. For now I'm going to return nil. We're going to get back to this once we register our user, save it locally, and then we are going to also write our initializer here. So I'm going to put a to-do here and call this add initializer. Okay, let's proceed, and what we want to do is we need three functions. First, we need to be able to register user. Second, we need to be able to log in a user, and finally we need to be able to log out a user. So these are the minimum functions we need to have for our user object to work with our Firebase. There will be more functions, but these are the three main functions that we are going to use in order to add this information into our login and finish registration screen. So let me write the login user function first, and this is going to be again class func. Okay, login user with, and we're going to login user with email, which is a string, and a password, which is string as well. And this function is going to have a completion handler because we want to be notified as soon as our login procedure is completed. So we'll say completion, and we are going to return error in case if there is one. This is going to be type of error question mark because it's an optional. And also what we are going to do is to tell our login screen as that if the email was verified or no, because how the system is going to work, once our user registers, we are going to send a verification email to his email address, and once he verifies his email, he will be able to log into his account. If the email is not verified, he's not going to be able to log in, so we want to check if the email is verified or no here before we log in our user. So apart from error, I want to also return a boolean to inform us if the email is verified or no. So I say is email verified. This is going to be a boolean, and here we are going to return nothing, and we can write our function. So in this function we provide our email and password. It will go ahead and register our user, login our user, sorry. And if there are any errors, it will return an error, and also it will return in value which is true or false in case if our user is email is verified or no. So in order to sign in a user, you can use authentication.auth.sign-in. And here we have different options of signing in a user, but the one we are interested in is sign in with email and password. And if I hit enter, I need to provide my email address, which is my email from here, and the password is the password that we have. And completion, if you just hit enter on it, it will have two parameters here: auth data result, which I'm going to call this variable, and an error, which is an optional. So once our email login is completed, this part of the code will be called, and this is running in a background. That's why we are using a completion handler here to be notified once our login is finished. So first thing we want to check when our user is logging in, if there are any errors from our Firebase, because if Firebase fails to log in the user, we want to get the error to see what's wrong with it. So I say if error is equals to nil, so there are no errors and we have safely logged in our user, else there was some kind of error, and I want to call my completion here and pass the information to my completion handler. So I say completion, and then I want to pass my error, and if the user email is verified or no, I will pass false here, because since there was an error logging in, we don't know if the user email is verified or no. So to be safe, we are just passing false here. And if there were no errors, we are going to do another if statement here. First, I want to check if the email was verified or no. So we say if auth data result, which is the variable here, then I need to unwrap this, and I need to access the user object it provides us. This is a Firebase function. And then we get a variable here is email verified, which is a boolean, and basically it tells Firebase, informs us if the specific user email was verified or no. And if it was verified, we are going to do something about it, else we are going to call our completion handler, and I'm going to pass my error here. In this case, it's going to be nil, and then I'm going to pass if the email was verified as false, because it's not in our if statement here. This is the else, so the email wasn't verified. In case if the email was verified, what we want to do is to download fuser object and save it locally. So we need some kind of function to be able to download a fuser object. So let's go to our Firebase just to see what's going on. Once the user is authenticated, he will appear here. But it doesn't mean that we have a user object, because the user that we have here has only an email address, his ID, and when it was created or when was the last sign in. But this is not enough information for us to keep all this data here. What we are going to do is, once our user is registered here, we are going to take a user ID of that specific user, and we are going to create a separate folder section in our database where we are going to save all our users. And here we will be able to save more information about the user that we actually need, because we want to save all this data here. You will see this once we register our first user, and then we're going to create a fuser object and save it to our Firebase.